Welcome to Nexus Clinical. Before diving into this lecture, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this content is at the user's risk. This is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay seeking medical advice for any medical condition they have, and they should consult their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures. The integration of biosimilar therapies represents a significant evolution in managing complex diseases, offering potential to expand patient access and mitigate escalating healthcare costs. For healthcare providers, successful implementation requires a foundational understanding of the science, regulatory pathways, and legal frameworks governing these agents. The main barrier to successful biosimilar adoption is the nocebo effect, a powerful psychosocial phenomenon where negative expectations about a treatment change can cause worsened symptoms or adverse events, regardless of the drug's pharmacology. Effective communication is a key clinical skill. This framework explains important regulatory distinctions, such as highly similar status and the functional difference of interchangeability, and presents a necessary, phased communication plan, using positive framing, empathetic validation, and shared decision-making to proactively build patient trust, set positive expectations, and reduce the nocebo effect, ensuring the full clinical and economic benefits of biosimilars are achieved. Upon completing this module, healthcare professionals will be equipped to differentiate biologics and biosimilars. They will understand how to define and distinguish between originator biologic medications, biosimilars, and generic drugs, while recognizing the natural variability inherent in all biologic products. Healthcare professionals will also be able to accurately describe the regulatory standards set by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for biosimilar approval. These standards specify that biosimilars must be highly similar to an existing approved biologic and must demonstrate no clinically meaningful differences in safety and effectiveness. Furthermore, professionals will understand the concept of interchangeability, recognizing that the designation of an active ingredient as interchangeable is related to pharmacy substitution policies. This designation does not imply clinical superiority over non-interchangeable biosimilars. They will be able to analyze legal constraints related to pharmacy substitution, specifically identifying and applying the requirements of state laws. For example, in Texas, there are particular rules that govern pharmacist substitutions, and professionals will learn how prescribers can prohibit such substitutions through proper methods. The module also covers the nocebo effect, which is a measurable psychobiological phenomenon where negative expectations can lead to worsened symptoms or adverse events, regardless of the medication's pharmacological properties. Healthcare providers will learn to recognize triggers of the nocebo effect, such as poor communication, clinician uncertainty, and the perception of a non-medical drug switch. These factors can heighten and reinforce negative patient responses. Additionally, professionals will be trained to implement a structured and phased communication strategy during medication switching. This includes pre-switch, during switch, and post-switch interactions designed to manage patient expectations and perceptions proactively. Applying positive framing and using language aligned with regulatory guidance is essential. This approach helps to reinforce the biosimilar's safety and equivalence, increasing patient acceptance of switching medications. Empathetic validation and active listening techniques will be emphasized to acknowledge patient concerns and foster a collaborative, trusting relationship. Finally, the importance of fostering a unified environment of confidence through consistent education and training across all members of the clinical team, including nurses, pharmacists, and administrators will be highlighted. This comprehensive, team-based approach is crucial to ensuring a cohesive message and building trust in biosimilar therapies. The integration of biosimilar therapies into clinical practice marks a significant evolution in managing complex diseases, offering the potential to increase patient access and reduce rising healthcare costs. For healthcare providers, a solid understanding of the science, regulatory pathways, and legal frameworks governing these agents is not just academic. It is a clinical necessity. This knowledge forms the foundation for building patient trust and is crucial for navigating the detailed conversations needed for successful treatment transitions. Mastering this area enables clinicians to communicate with accuracy and confidence, directly addressing misinformation and fears that can hinder therapeutic success. This section outlines the key scientific and regulatory principles that define the modern biologic and biosimilar toolkit. Biological products, or biologics, are a diverse and powerful category of medicines used to diagnose, prevent, and treat various conditions, including chronic inflammatory diseases and cancers. Unlike regular small molecule drugs, which are usually made through chemical processes and have straightforward, simple structures, biologics are generally large, complex molecules. They are produced using biotechnology within living systems, such as microorganisms, plant cells, or animal cells. This manufacturing process, which utilizes the intricate machinery of living organisms, creates products that are often harder to fully characterize than their small molecule counterparts. A key and inherent feature of all biologics, both original products and their biosimilars, is some natural variability. While living cells can produce exact copies of a protein's primary amino acid sequence, modifications such as adding sugar molecules, glycosylation, or altering specific amino acids can happen. This means that even between different manufacturing batches of the same original biologic, minor structural differences are normal and expected. As a result, it is impossible to create a perfectly identical copy of a biologic, which is the main scientific reason for the distinction between a generic drug and a biosimilar. This idea of controlled, inherent variation is essential for explaining biosimilars to patients. It helps normalize the concept that minor differences are a natural feature of all biologics and not a flaw of biosimilars. Within this landscape, the reference product acts as the scientific and regulatory standard. A reference product is the single biological product already approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, based on comprehensive data proving its safety and effectiveness. Any proposed biosimilar must be thoroughly compared to and assessed against this specific reference product to ensure it meets the strict approval standards. The main aim of biosimilar development isn't to independently reprove the safety and effectiveness of a new molecule from scratch, but rather to show through a comprehensive, totality of the evidence approach that the proposed product is highly similar to the established reference product. This shortened development pathway, which avoids the need for duplicating costly and lengthy clinical trials, allows biosimilars to be introduced at potentially lower costs, thereby expanding treatment options for patients. The FDA's approval standard for a biosimilar is scientifically rigorous and clearly defined. A biosimilar is a biological product that is highly similar to an existing FDA-approved reference product, despite minor differences in clinically inactive components. Additionally, it must be shown that there are no clinically meaningful differences between the biosimilar and the reference product regarding safety, purity, and potency, which together determine safety and effectiveness. These key phrases, highly similar and no clinically meaningful differences, are the foundation of the regulatory framework and should be included in clinical communication. They represent a high level of scientific evaluation that directly addresses patient concerns that a biosimilar is an inferior or less effective version of their current medication. To meet this standard, a manufacturer must demonstrate biosimilarity through a thorough, step-by-step process called the totality of the evidence approach. This process starts with a detailed analytical comparison. Using advanced technology, manufacturers perform extensive studies to analyze and compare the structural and functional features of the proposed biosimilar and the reference product. These analyses evaluate aspects such as the product's purity, chemical identity, and bioactivity to show that it is highly similar at the molecular level. If these initial studies prove a high level of similarity, the manufacturer can then move forward with additional animal and human studies, including pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic, and immunogenicity tests, to ensure there are no meaningful clinical differences. The abbreviated pathway is often misunderstood by patients and some clinicians, who may falsely believe that fewer or smaller clinical trials mean a less comprehensive review. It is important to clarify that the goal of the biosimilar development program differs from that of the originator. It does not aim to independently demonstrate clinical benefit, which has already been established by the reference product. Instead, its purpose is to show biosimilarity through a thorough comparative process. The FDA's extensive experience and dedicated research have confirmed that this approach is scientifically valid. Evidence indicates that FDA-approved biosimilars are as safe and effective as their reference products, and switching between a reference product and its biosimilar does not increase the risk of death, serious adverse events, or treatment discontinuation. Further nuance is introduced into the regulatory landscape through a specific designation known as interchangeability. An interchangeable biosimilar is a biosimilar that has met additional requirements outlined by the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act. To earn this designation, a manufacturer must demonstrate not only that its product is biosimilar to the reference product, but also provide sufficient data to support two additional points. First, the interchangeable product is expected to produce the same clinical result as the reference product in any given patient. Second, for products that are administered more than once, the risk in terms of safety or reduced effectiveness when alternating or switching between the interchangeable product and the reference product should not be greater than the risk associated with using the reference product without such switching. This is typically demonstrated through a dedicated switching study in which patients are alternated between the reference product and the proposed interchangeable product. The main legal and practical result of this designation concerns pharmacy practice. An interchangeable biosimilar can be substituted for the reference product at the pharmacy without the direct involvement of the prescribing healthcare professional, similar to how generic drugs are regularly substituted for brand-name drugs. However, this practice is not automatic and depends on the specific pharmacy laws of each state. A key point in education for both clinicians and patients is that the term interchangeable refers to a regulatory distinction related to substitution logistics, not an indication of clinical superiority. The FDA has clearly stated that an interchangeable product is not considered safer or more effective than a biosimilar that has not been designated as interchangeable. Both biosimilars and interchangeable biosimilars must meet the same rigorous statutory standard for biosimilarity, meaning they are both as safe and effective as the reference product. A manufacturer may have good reasons for not pursuing an interchangeable designation, such as a business strategy or because the medication is mainly administered in a hospital or clinic setting where pharmacy-level substitution is not applicable. This distinction is a frequent source of confusion and can inadvertently create a false hierarchy in the minds of patients. The term interchangeable can easily be misinterpreted to mean better or higher quality. This perception can create significant anxiety if a patient is switched to a non-interchangeable biosimilar, as they may feel their care has been downgraded for financial reasons. This negative expectation is a classic trigger for the nocebo effect, a phenomenon where the perception of receiving an inferior treatment can lead to negative clinical outcomes. Therefore, the very structure of the regulatory pathway, while designed to facilitate market access, can prime patients for a nocebo response if the distinction is not proactively and precisely explained. Clinicians must be prepared to dismantle this false hierarchy by clearly stating that both types of products meet the FDA's high standards for safety and effectiveness. While federal law, through the BPCIA, created the regulatory pathway for biosimilars and the designation of interchangeability, the actual practice of pharmacy-level substitution is governed by a patchwork of state-level legislation. These laws vary considerably from state to state in their requirements for when and how a substitution can occur, as well as the communication required with the patient and the prescriber. This makes it imperative for clinicians to be familiar with the specific laws in their state of practice. A case study examining Texas pharmacy law offers a clear example of the specificity and practical implications of these regulations. According to the Texas Administrative Code, a pharmacist in Texas is permitted to substitute an interchangeable biological product designated by the Food and Drug Administration for a prescribed reference product only if three conditions are met. First, the interchangeable product must cost the patient less than the prescribed product. Second, the patient must not refuse the substitution. Finally, the prescribing practitioner must not have explicitly prohibited the substitution through a valid dispensing directive. The methods by which a prescriber can prohibit this substitution are highly specific and vary by the mode of prescription transmission. For a written prescription, a Texas prescriber must write, in their own handwriting, the phrase brand necessary or brand medically necessary directly on the face of the prescription form. Critically, the law explicitly invalidates other common methods used to indicate dispensing preference. Pre-printed checkboxes, rubber stamps, or other notations on the prescription are not considered valid methods to prohibit substitution. If a prescriber uses one of these invalid methods, the pharmacist is legally permitted to substitute. For oral prescriptions, the prescriber or their agent must verbally state brand necessary or brand medically necessary during the call, and this instruction must be noted in the pharmacy's record. For electronic prescriptions, the substitution instructions must be clearly indicated within the electronic order itself. The stringency of these requirements demonstrates a clear legislative intent. The system is designed to make prohibiting substitution a deliberate, high-friction action, for example, handwriting a specific phrase rather than a reflexive, low-friction one, for example, checking a box. The legal default setting is to permit the substitution of an interchangeable product when one is available. An healthcare provider who is unaware of these precise requirements, or who fails to comply with them, for instance, by circling a pre-printed dispense as written option on a prescription pad, effectively cedes their clinical decision-making authority on this matter to the pharmacist and, by extension, to the patient's insurance formulary. This illustrates that a deep understanding of state pharmacy law is not merely a matter of legal compliance. It is a fundamental prerequisite for maintaining clinical autonomy in the prescribing of biologics. A knowledge gap in this area can lead to unintended patient switches, which can disrupt the therapeutic alliance and force the clinical team into a reactive, rather than proactive, communication posture. While the scientific evidence robustly supports the safety and efficacy of biosimilars, the success of transitioning a patient from a reference biologic to a biosimilar is not guaranteed by data alone. A significant and often underestimated barrier is the nocebo effect, a powerful psychosocial phenomenon that can lead to negative treatment outcomes despite the pharmacological equivalence of the medication. This section will explore the psychobiology of the nocebo effect, its specific triggers within the context of biosimilar switching, and its profound clinical and economic consequences. Understanding the nocebo effect is critical for healthcare providers, as it reframes patient communication from a soft skill into a crucial clinical intervention designed to protect the therapeutic benefits of the switch. The nocebo effect, derived from the Latin "I shall harm," is the negative counterpart to the more widely known placebo effect. It is defined as the occurrence of negative expectations about a treatment or a change in treatment that leads to the experience of worsened symptoms or adverse events. Crucially, these negative outcomes are not attributable to the pharmacological action of the treatment itself, but are generated by the patient's mindset. Empirical evidence from numerous studies demonstrates that nocebo effects are significant, measurable, and can manifest across a wide range of conditions. The human brain is physiologically predisposed to prioritize negative or threatening information, as this has greater survival value than positive information. This negativity bias helps explain why nocebo effects can sometimes manifest more rapidly and powerfully than placebo effects, and can be remarkably persistent once established. The underlying mechanisms are not purely psychological. They involve tangible neurobiological pathways. Anticipatory anxiety and negative expectations are known to activate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis, the body's central stress response system. Furthermore, specific neurotransmitter systems, such as the cholecystokinin, CCK, system can be activated, leading to states of heightened pain sensitivity, hyperalgesia. Framing the nocebo effect in these biological terms is essential for clinicians. It is not an imaginary or fabricated response. It is a real, measurable psychobiological phenomenon where the mind exerts a powerful influence over the body's experience of symptoms. This scientific understanding elevates the importance of the clinical conversation. Communication becomes a therapeutic tool aimed at modulating these physiological pathways by shaping patient expectations in a positive and realistic direction. In the specific context of biosimilar switching, several factors can trigger or amplify a nocebo response. A primary driver is the prevalence of low knowledge, misconceptions, and a lack of confidence regarding biosimilars among both patients and, critically, healthcare providers themselves. When patients sense uncertainty or hesitation from their clinical team, it validates their own fears and creates powerful negative expectations. The communication during the clinical encounter is a pivotal factor. The nocebo effect can be unwittingly triggered by a clinician's unintended negative verbal suggestions or nonverbal behaviors. A hesitant tone of voice, lack of eye contact, or body language that conveys uncertainty can communicate more to a patient than the words being spoken. For example, a clinician who says, "The insurance company is making us switch you to the biosimilar version," immediately frames the change as an involuntary, cost-driven decision that is being imposed upon both the patient and the provider. This language can foster a sense of disempowerment and suspicion that the new medication is inferior. The concept of a non-medical switch is a particularly potent trigger. When a patient who is stable and doing well on a reference biologic is switched to a biosimilar for purely economic reasons, they may perceive this as a deprioritization of their health in favor of cost savings. This perception can lead to hypervigilance for negative symptoms and a predisposition to attribute any new or worsening feelings to the new medication. This effect is compounded by negative information that patients may encounter in the news or on social media, which can further fuel their anxieties. The healthcare provider is the linchpin in this dynamic. Their own confidence in the science of biosimilarity and their ability to communicate that confidence effectively is the most powerful defense against the nocebo effect. A well-intentioned but poorly executed conversation can inadvertently cause clinical harm. The consequences of the nocebo effect are not theoretical. They are concrete, measurable, and can completely undermine the goals of biosimilar adoption. Evidence for the nocebo effect's impact comes from comparisons of clinical trial designs. Studies have observed significantly higher drug discontinuation rates in open-label switching studies, where patients know they are switching, compared to double-blind trials, where they do not. This strongly suggests that the awareness of the switch itself and the negative expectations that accompany it are driving the negative outcomes. Real-world data paints an even starker picture. One study analyzing outcomes for patients with rheumatoid arthritis who were switched from the adalimumab originator to a biosimilar for non-medical reasons found significant negative consequences. Compared to patients who remained on the originator, the switchers were less likely to see their condition improve and more likely to see it worsen. Physician-reported patient adherence to the medication declined significantly among the switchers. Furthermore, patient-reported outcomes showed that quality of life was worse, activity impairment was greater, and trends toward poorer health status and greater pain were observed in the group that switched. These clinical consequences have direct economic repercussions. The nocebo effect can lead to treatment failure, reduced adherence, and early discontinuation of a perfectly effective therapy. This, in turn, leads to increased healthcare utilization, including more frequent clinic visits, additional diagnostic tests, and potentially the need to switch to a different, often more expensive, therapy. The potential cost savings that motivated the switch to the biosimilar are thus completely nullified and may even be reversed, resulting in a net increase in costs for the healthcare system. Beyond the financial impact, a failed switch due to the nocebo effect can severely damage the patient-provider relationship, eroding the trust that is essential for effective long-term care. This presents a significant challenge in clinical practice, the paradox of informed consent. The ethical and legal obligation to inform a patient about a change in their medication including the reasons for the change, such as cost and potential side effects, is a cornerstone of modern medicine. However, the very act of delivering this information can, if not handled carefully, plant the seeds of negative expectation that blossom into a nocebo response. This does not suggest that informed consent should be abandoned, but rather that the method of communication is paramount. The conversation must be framed skillfully to balance the duty to inform with the clinical imperative to build confidence and prevent harm. Furthermore, the nocebo effect acts as a diagnostic confounder. When a patient reports new or worsening symptoms after a switch, the clinician must consider a differential diagnosis that includes a true adverse drug reaction, a coincidental fluctuation in their underlying disease, or a nocebo response. Differentiating between these possibilities is clinically difficult, as there is no biomarker for the nocebo effect. Misattributing a nocebo response to a failure of the biosimilar can lead to an unnecessary switch back to the more expensive reference product, which not only increases costs but also reinforces the patient's negative belief, making future switches even more challenging. Therefore, healthcare providers must be trained to include the nocebo effect in their clinical reasoning and to employ communication strategies that extend into the post-switch phase to better understand the patient's full experience. Given the profound impact of the nocebo effect, communication must be recognized as a core clinical competency for managing biosimilar transitions. A successful switch depends less on the pharmacology of the drug and more on the psychology of the patient, which is shaped directly by the clinical encounter. An effective communication strategy is not a single event, but a structured, phased process that proactively builds trust, sets positive expectations, and provides ongoing support. This section provides a practical, evidence-based guide for healthcare providers, translating the principles of communication science into actionable strategies that can be implemented before, during, and after the switch. The conversation surrounding a biosimilar switch should be viewed as a process, not a singular pronouncement. A multifaceted approach that is intentionally implemented across distinct phases, pre-switch, during switch, and post-switch, is essential for success. This structure allows the clinical team to move from proactive education to collaborative decision-making and finally to supportive follow-up, addressing the patient's evolving needs at each stage of the transition. Rushing this process or treating it as a simple administrative notification is a primary cause of communication failure and can significantly increase the risk of a nocebo response. The way information is framed has a dramatic impact on how it is received. Research specifically examining communication about biosimilars has shown that positive framing is a powerful tool for building patient acceptance. In one study, patients who received a positively framed explanation about switching to a biosimilar were significantly more willing to make the switch compared to those who received a negatively framed explanation, 67% versus 46%. The positive framing group also reported greater perceived efficacy of the biosimilar and found the explanation more convincing. Positive framing is not about withholding information or being dishonest. It is about consciously choosing to emphasize the positive attributes and similarities. Instead of focusing on what is different or that the change is due to cost, the conversation should be anchored in the concepts of equivalence and continuity of care. This involves both verbal and nonverbal communication. Verbally, healthcare providers should use clear, reassuring language that mirrors the FDA's own messaging. Effective phrases include the following. First, this biosimilar was manufactured to be as similar as possible to the biological medicine you are currently taking. Second, it has undergone extensive clinical trials that have demonstrated it is just as effective as your current medication and has the same safety profile. Lastly, the manufacturing process adheres to strict guidelines, and the medicine is carefully regulated by the Food and Drug Administration to ensure it is both effective and safe. It is also beneficial to frame the cost-saving aspect as a societal or system-level benefit rather than a personal cost-cutting measure. For example, the availability of biosimilars helps to save healthcare costs, which allows our health system to provide these important treatments to more patients who need them. This reframes the switch from a potentially negative, individual event into a positive contribution to the broader community. Nonverbal cues are equally important. A clinician who delivers this information while smiling, Nodding, making good eye contact, and using a confident vocal tone reinforces the message of safety and reassurance. Conversely, a clinician who appears hesitant, avoids eye contact, or uses a tentative tone will undermine even the most perfectly worded script. Before a patient can accept new information, they must feel heard and understood. Empathetic communication is the key to building the therapeutic alliance necessary for a successful switch. It involves actively listening to the patient's concerns, understanding their perspective, and validating their feelings as reasonable and legitimate. When a patient expresses fear, skepticism, or anxiety about switching to a biosimilar, the clinician's first response should not be to immediately counter with facts and data. The initial step is to validate the emotion. Achieving effective communication with patients can be accomplished through several well-established techniques. One approach involves using open-ended questions instead of yes or no questions. For example, rather than asking, "Do you have any questions?" which can often be answered with a simple no, you might ask, "What have you heard about these types of medicines?" or "Tell me more about what's on your mind regarding this change." This encourages patients to share more information and express their concerns. Another valuable technique is making validating statements. Phrases such as, "It makes complete sense that you would have questions about changing a medication that has been working well for you," or "That's a very reasonable concern," demonstrate to the patient that their feelings are acknowledged and taken seriously, fostering a supportive environment. Using reflective responses is also effective. This involves paraphrasing the patient's emotional content to show understanding and active listening. For instance, you might say, "It sounds like you're worried that this new medicine won't work as well and that your symptoms might come back." Such responses help confirm that the patient's concerns are understood. Lastly, employing positive nonverbal cues enhances communication. The Solar model provides useful guidance for this purpose. It suggests sitting squarely facing the patient, maintaining an open posture, leaning in slightly to show interest, keeping good eye contact, and remaining relaxed. These nonverbal signals can significantly improve the connection and trust between healthcare provider and patient. By starting the conversation with empathy and validation, the clinician transforms a potentially adversarial interaction, "Why are you making me switch?" into a collaborative one. "Let's work through your concerns together." This process builds the trust required for the patient to become receptive to the educational information and positive framing that will follow. Shared decision-making is a collaborative process in which clinicians and patients work together to make healthcare decisions, balancing the best clinical evidence with the patient's individual preferences, values, and circumstances. The goal is to move away from a paternalistic model and toward a partnership built on a two-way exchange of information and preferences. In the context of a biosimilar switch, which may be mandated by an insurance plan or health system, the application of SDM requires adaptation. The decision may not be whether to switch, but rather how to make the mandated switch a success for the individual patient. This reframing is crucial for preserving the patient's sense of autonomy and control, which are powerful antidotes to the anxiety that fuels the nocebo effect. The shared decision-making conversation can be structured in a clear and effective manner. It begins by acknowledging the situation, where the healthcare provider transparently states the reason for the switch. For example, the provider might say, "Our health plan is now preferentially covering the biosimilar version of your medication." This upfront clarity helps set the context and eases patient understanding. Next, the provider should state the clinical equivalence of the new medication. Framing this positively, they could reassure the patient by saying, "Based on all the data from the Food and Drug Administration, I am confident that this medicine will be just as safe and effective for you." This reassurance helps build trust and confidence. Following this, the conversation shifts to inviting the patient to collaborate on the process. The provider emphasizes their goal of working together to ensure a smooth transition. They might say, "My primary goal is to partner with you to make this transition as smooth and successful as possible. To do that, I need to understand what is important to you. What are your biggest concerns as we make this change?" This approach encourages open dialogue and patient engagement. Finally, the provider and patient work together to create a monitoring plan. The provider could suggest, "Let's agree on a plan. After you start the new medication, my nurse will call you in 1 week to see how you are doing. We will also schedule a follow-up appointment in 1 month. What symptoms or changes are most important for us to track? This collaborative planning ensures ongoing assessment and patient safety. Overall, this structured approach fosters transparency, reassurance, collaboration, and active follow-up in the decision-making process. This approach respects the patient as an active participant in their care, even within external constraints. Involving them in the planning and monitoring process, it gives them a sense of agency and control, transforming them from a passive recipient of a directive into an active partner in managing their health. This collaborative spirit is fundamental to mitigating the nocebo effect. These communication techniques are not meant to be used in isolation, but are most powerful when integrated synergistically. An attempt at positive framing without first establishing an empathetic connection can sound dismissive or like a sales pitch. Empathetic validation creates the psychological safety and trust that allows a patient to be receptive to the positively framed information. Shared decision-making then provides the practical framework to channel this positive, collaborative energy into a concrete action plan for the switch, ensuring the patient feels supported and empowered throughout the process. Effective communication is not solely the result of individual clinician skill. It is the product of a supportive healthcare ecosystem. To ensure that every patient receives clear, consistent, and confidence-building information about biosimilars, health systems must invest in two foundational pillars: robust, patient-centered educational resources and comprehensive, ongoing training for all members of the healthcare team. This section outlines the essential components of this supportive infrastructure, providing a framework for creating an environment where successful biosimilar transitions are the norm, not the exception. Patient education should be a proactive, multi-format endeavor that begins well before a switch is imminent. Providing accessible, easy-to-understand materials empowers patients to engage in more productive conversations with their providers and helps to inoculate them against misinformation. Effective patient education materials share several key characteristics. First, they use clear, patient-friendly language. This includes deliberately avoiding clinical jargon like reference product and instead using more intuitive terms such as original biologic or brand name medicine. The materials should clearly define what a biosimilar is, emphasizing that it is a type of biologic, not a simple generic drug. The core message must be an unambiguous statement of safety and efficacy, explaining that biosimilars have no clinically meaningful differences from the original biologic and are approved by the FDA through a rigorous scientific process. Second, education should be delivered through multiple formats to accommodate different learning styles. This includes written fact sheets and brochures, visual infographics, and short, engaging videos. Whenever possible, these materials should be made available in multiple languages to serve diverse patient populations. Third, leveraging resources from trusted, independent patient advocacy organizations can significantly enhance credibility. Organizations such as the Arthritis Foundation, the Global Healthy Living Foundation, and its Creaky Joints community, and the National Psoriasis Foundation have developed excellent, evidence-based patient guides, toolkits, and videos. Clinicians should curate a list of these high-quality resources and direct patients to them. Finally, patient education can be made more powerful by explicitly and gently addressing the nocebo effect itself. Explaining the phenomenon in simple terms can empower patients to become more aware of their own expectations and how they might influence their experience. A statement such as, "It's very normal to feel a little anxious when starting any new medication. Sometimes, just the worry about a change can make you notice things you wouldn't otherwise. This is a common experience, and we want you to know that we are here to support you and answer any questions you have along the way," can normalize these feelings and reframe them as manageable rather than as a sign of drug failure. Many healthcare providers report a lack of confidence in their own knowledge of biosimilars, particularly regarding the nuances of the FDA approval process, which directly impacts their ability to communicate effectively with patients. To address this gap, healthcare organizations must implement structured training and continuing medical education (CME) programs. An effective curriculum should move beyond the basic science to encompass the psychological and practical aspects of managing a switch. Based on identified best practices and existing educational programs, a comprehensive curriculum framework for healthcare providers should include the following 4 modules. This foundational module provides an in-depth exploration of the topics covered in the first section of this report. It aims to help learners understand the differences between biologic medicines, biosimilars, and generic drugs. Additionally, it explains the approach known as the totality of the evidence used for approval in this field. A crucial aspect clarified in this module is that the designation of interchangeable is a regulatory classification related to pharmacy substitution. It does not indicate that a biosimilar has superior clinical quality compared to other products. The second module, too, is the psychology of switching and understanding the nocebo effect. This section concentrates on the content from the second part of the course. Healthcare providers should learn to clearly define the nocebo effect and understand its underlying psychological and biological mechanisms. The training program must emphasize the specific triggers that are relevant in the context of biosimilar medications. These triggers include negative framing of information and the perception of a medication switch as being non-medical. It is also important to review the evidence demonstrating the clinical and economic consequences associated with these triggers. Module 3 is the clinical conversation, an integrated communication model. This is the most critical, skills-based module. It should provide practical training on the phased communication strategy detailed in Section 3. The module must go beyond lectures and incorporate interactive elements like role-playing and video-based case scenarios. The goal is for clinicians to practice integrating the techniques of positive framing, empathetic validation, and shared decision-making into a seamless, confident, and patient-centered conversation. Finally, Module 4, the practical implementation and workflow integration addresses the logistical aspects of biosimilar integration. It should include a review of the specific state pharmacy laws governing substitution in the clinician's jurisdiction. It should also cover practice-level workflow development, including protocols for identifying patients for a switch, scheduling pre-switch educational conversations, and implementing the post-switch monitoring plan. Patient confidence is fragile and can be easily undermined by inconsistent messaging. A patient may receive a perfectly executed, confidence-building message from their physician, only to have that confidence shattered by a subsequent interaction with another team member. For instance, a nurse who expresses unfamiliarity, "I haven't used this new one very much," or a billing administrator who refers to the biosimilar as the cheaper generic version, can undo all the physician's careful work. Therefore, education and training must extend to the entire patient-facing clinical team to promote a single, unified voice. Nurses, who often spend significant time with patients during infusions or injection training, are particularly influential in educating and reassuring them. Pharmacists are critical partners in managing substitutions and counseling patients on their medications. Medical assistants, schedulers, and administrative staff who may discuss authorizations or costs with patients must also be trained on appropriate, positive terminology. For large healthcare systems, educating every individual healthcare provider can be a logistical challenge. A highly effective and scalable approach is a train-the-trainer model. This involves identifying clinical champions, respected physicians, specialist nurses, or pharmacists, within key departments that frequently use biologics, e.g., rheumatology, gastroenterology, oncology, dermatology. These champions undergo intensive training on the full curriculum. They are then equipped with standardized educational toolkits, including presentation decks, role-playing scenarios, and patient handouts, to disseminate the training to their peers at the departmental level. This model leverages internal expertise, ensures the training is tailored to the specific context of each specialty, and fosters a local culture of shared ownership and responsibility for effective communication, making the initiative far more likely to be sustained over time than a one-time, top-down mandate. The successful integration of biosimilars into routine clinical care is a complex undertaking that extends far beyond the domains of science and regulation. While the evidence unequivocally supports the safety and efficacy of these agents, their ultimate value is contingent upon patient acceptance and adherence. The nocebo effect stands as the most significant barrier to this acceptance, capable of transforming a pharmacologically sound therapeutic switch into a clinical failure through the power of negative expectation. This report has established that mitigating the nocebo effect is not an abstract goal, but a tangible clinical outcome that can be achieved through a deliberate and structured approach. The foundation of this approach is a deep institutional commitment to education for both patients and providers. Healthcare providers must be equipped with a sophisticated understanding of the science of biosimilarity, the nuances of the regulatory landscape, and the specific pharmacy laws governing their practice. This knowledge is the prerequisite for the confidence that must be projected in every patient interaction. However, knowledge alone is insufficient. The critical variable is communication. The evidence-based, phased communication strategy detailed herein, integrating the synergistic techniques of positive framing, empathetic validation, and shared decision-making, provides a practical roadmap for clinicians. It reframes the biosimilar conversation from a simple directive into a collaborative, supportive process that builds trust and empowers patients. Ultimately, fostering patient confidence in biosimilars requires a system-level commitment. It demands the creation of an ecosystem of confidence, where clear, consistent, and positive messaging is delivered by every member of the healthcare team, supported by high-quality patient education materials and ongoing professional training. By embracing communication as a core clinical intervention, healthcare systems can overcome the psychosocial barriers to adoption, realize the full clinical and economic promise of biosimilar therapy, and ensure that more patients have access to these vital medicines. The practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this content is at the user's risk. This is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay seeking medical advice for any medical condition they have, and they should consult their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.